that happens is you're jumping into ice cold water, and I don't know, I'm sure some of you might have done that before. It really hits you hard, and it can really take the breath out of you. But in her case, she said it's like an ice cream headache, like the worst ice cream headache you've ever had is the first thing that you feel. And then you go down and down and down, and you see an entrance, and you enter this iceberg, and it's all blue, like she says, it's like a robin's egg. The floor's red and orange and yellow, all these amazing colors, and then everything goes wrong.
So she and her partner, they're swimming through it, and after a while of taking lots of video footage, they turn around to go back out, but because it's a melting iceberg, because it's a living beast that's just changing shape all the time, their exit shuts. And they're stuck inside the iceberg. And she's going, I'm trying not to panic, because if I start breathing too heavily, every breath I take is a precious breath.
Every move you make.
Every move I make.
No one's watching her, which is so frightening.
And so they just wait. They patiently wait. And then a new opening happens. It's like a weird mirror labyrinth, like something you would see in a weird fantasy movie. A new opening happens, and they manage to get out. And then they just have to wait a while to acclimatize, don't they? You can't just go straight back up. And
so the people on the boat are thinking, well, they're gone.
Yeah.
Because they've heard all these changes and this carving and bits have fallen off. And the people on the boat are like, well, that's the end of them then.
Yeah. But then they come back up, they go up, they tell their story, it's all going nice. You'd think, that's enough, we've explored it. They go, let's get back in there. Let's do it again. So they go for a second time.
Crackers.
Well, what are the chances of that going wrong again?
Exactly.
I mean, it's not going to happen twice, is it?
Yeah.
It sounded like even there was a scary moment at one point on this expedition when she resurfaced, and the boat, I think, had drifted, and she came up through a hole in the ice, but the ice around her was so high she couldn't see anything. And you're in the middle of the Antarctic, and her boat's disappeared. Yeah. And I think the boat just happened to swing around, and she just glimpsed the stern.
It's because they had to take the anchor up, and so it drifted while the anchor was up. So they're nearly lost at sea, basically, in this moment. So they get back on the boat, and you think, all right, let's get back to home.
Don't go back a third time.
They go a third time.
Oh, my God.
They go a third time, and this time they get stuck inside, and in order to get out, she basically got up to a point in the iceberg where there was a gap at the top for them to climb out, but it was 130 feet above their heads. So you're looking at a climbing wall, basically, that's unclimbable, except...
Yes, and I couldn't quite get it because she's out of the water by this time.
Exactly.
So she's just climbing up the iceberg.
So she must be inside of the iceberg where there's a hole on the inside that
leads
to
the top. It's like a triathlon kind of thing, You do the swimming bit and then you do the climbing bit.
When do you do the cycling bit?
There's a bike at the top
across
of the
top of the iceberg.
But this is where the story genuinely turns a bit Brian Blessedy for me, because I just think this is impossible.
So sorry, she climbs up 130 feet.
But here's the thing, right? This is solid ice wall, right? So how do you climb ice wall? And she thinks to herself, hang on, there's little animals that burrow themselves into the ice wall, which are creating natural handholds for me to do. And apparently there's enough of these that she could scale 130
So it's a
feet.
little fish exactly the size of her finger, which makes a little hole where it lives.
The fish finger, yeah. Well, the finger fish. Yeah.
And they make holes in the iceberg, and she can use them to grip onto and pull herself up.
So she climbs I know. It's blessed. This is suddenly...
All the way up?
All the way, 130
There are fish
feet.
living 100 feet up on this iceberg.
130.
Yeah.
How did they get up there?
Who knows?
Yeah.
I guess if the previous fish have gone up there...
Icebergs flip over all the time.
Yeah.
Don't know. Do we think, as well as there being cracks in the iceberg, there's some cracks in her story?
And they all climb out this way, 130 feet up, and then they're back on the boat. And then
they slid down the iceberg, didn't they?
And so they're sitting on the boat not long afterwards. I think they're having some drinks and some food. And then suddenly they just hear screaming from other people on the boat. And there's huge cracking noises. And basically there's been such a melting point on the iceberg that it cracks in on itself. And they go, well, if we were in there, we'd be dead. We'd be squished in a second. Wow. So then they go back again. No, they don't. But what a story.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is quite an odd thing to choose to do with your life. You must have to have a very unusual personality not to panic in all of these circumstances.
Yeah.
Like, she did one other dive, which she described, and it was into a really, really small cave. So she's a cave diver, basically. So underwater cave diver. And she was taking a scientist down there with her, who obviously had been trained properly how to dive, but the scientist got wedged in this tiny cave and panicked.
Luckily, a tiny fish came and nibbled her out.
And it was a really nice story because earlier in the dive, she had found that fish and it had a thorn in its fin.
Yes.
And she pulled the thorn out,
yeah.
and then the fish came back to help her.
Okay. It's not a Bronte novel. This is real life.
Sorry, so she's wedged.
She's wedged, and they have a guideline, which is the only way you can find your way back to the entrance of the cave, because it's full of other channels and tunnels and stuff, so you'll never find your way back otherwise.
Right.
The guideline's broken, which is the only thing to lead them back to the entrance. Somehow, and I'm not quite sure how Jill does this, while she's trying to fix the guideline, she loses her partner, who was previously wedged in a rock.
no.
Yeah, seems careless. Bit of an oversight. So she spends 73 minutes desperately looking for her partner while trapped in this cave. No idea if she's going to escape.
It's extraordinary.
And also thinking, oh God, I've killed this scientist. How awkward. But imagine the moment, and maybe it's all worth it for this, when finally she realised she has not only found her way to the entrance, but she sees a little glimpse of light, but there is waiting at the entrance the scientist, who apparently her mask is just full of tears, because the scientist has assumed that Jill's dead and she's probably going to die too, waiting at the entrance for her. And
That's amazing.
she was all right. And she said the weirdest thoughts go through your head. Like when she thought she was going to die, you think things like, oh my God, I have to get home though. My husband doesn't know how to do the taxes.
Wow.
That's an amazing story. And also, it's given me a new respect for the word guideline.
Yeah.
You know, we're so used to hearing about the conceptual guidelines, the theoretical ones.
Government guidelines suggest
Yeah,
that.
exactly. And actually, guidelines can save your life.
Yeah.
I was reading about what Heine studies in the other areas of her life, because loads and loads of cave diving, particularly. And have you guys heard of the halocline?
No.
So she studies animals which are often found beneath the halocline. And the halocline is a boundary between fresh water, which is higher up, and salt water, which is lower down. And she says the boundary layer is as thin as a sheet of paper, but you can also see it when you're in the cave, when you dive. So as you go through it, everything goes blurry for a second because you've broken the barrier between the two kinds of
Like
water.
going through a mirror which takes you to a parallel universe.
It's exactly like that. And then as soon as you get down to the salt water, everything snaps back into perfect clarity and focus, and you look up and you can see the halocline above you.
But you meet the saltwater version of yourself. The freshwater version of yourself on the other side, upside down.
Yes. And then you have to climb using fishy ice holes downwards. Yeah.
Early cave divers. The first UK cave diver was in 1935, and potentially this is the first world cave diving.
Quite late.
That's what I thought, right? I read in a few places this was the world's first cave diving, and then a few others, it's first UK. It happened at Wookey Hole, and it was a lady called Penelope Powell. And she did it with a guy called Graham Balcom.
I think it is in the UK, because you find lots of accounts of other people trying similar things around the world, and usually you just attach a hose to yourself and go deep in. But definitely in Britain, and it's thought of as the birth of cave diving.
As like a proper sport, basically.
Yeah. So Balcom actually tried going into a different cave first, and he made his own massively long snorkel out of a hose pipe and a woman's bike frame, and he almost died because that didn't work very well. So they upgraded their gear, in fact, when he went down with Penelope Mossy Powell, as she was called. But it was...
Sorry, let's just go back to that a second. Penelope Powell, her nickname was Mossy.
Mossy.
And is she single?
Everyone had a nickname in the 30s.
Mossy Powell. Wow.
Mossy.
Do we know why she had the nickname?
She had just hair on the southern side of her body.
I'm not sure, but I know that you would have got along very well with her, Andy. Anyway, they then at that point would have a hard hat, and that would be attached to this hose called the diver's umbilical, which is basically a combined breathing hose and phone, so that you could communicate with the surface. So they went into Wookey Hole, and they went, many, many chambers in, a long way, 170 foot they went in.